The file from Van Wert County, Ohio, landed on Evelyn's desk at 8 in the morning. There was no return address on the envelope. Inside were only two items: a custody form dated 1968 and a single note written in ballpoint pen. This child was never adopted, but he was disinherited. Evelyn read the note, then looked at the law firm seal in the lower corner of the form. Pierce and Harlan, Van Wert County. She set the file down where it was and stood up. Arthur's door was closed. She walked in without knocking. Arthur was sitting with his back to the window. Evelyn placed the envelope on the table, turning the sealed corner toward him. Arthur looked at the document. Where did this come from? I don't know. There's no postmark. Someone must have dropped it off in person. Arthur looked at the seal in the lower left corner of the form. Bring the rest, he said. Van Wert County was a small farming town in northwestern Ohio. Cornfields, straight roads, one-story town hall buildings. Harold Eugene Whitfield had died here on September 12, 2025, at the age of 78. Heart failure. He left no formal will. His estate was to be distributed according to the legal line of succession by court order. At first glance, Whitfield's property was an ordinary farmstead: 120 dönum of farmland, an old barn, and an abandoned irrigation canal west of Van Wert. The wooden sign by the roadside had faded over the years. Neighbors described Harold as a quiet man. He rarely came into town and didn't talk much to anyone. But the land had been the subject of a lease agreement signed with Van Wert Natural Gas Company in 1994. Revenue from the natural gas rights beneath the land had flowed steadily for 30 years since then. The total amount exceeded $800,000, and this right was to pass to the next legal heir along with Harold Whitfield's property. According to court records, only one name appeared as the legal heir: Gary Whitfield, the 43-year-old son of Harold's brother. But the form in the envelope told a different story. For people sat around the office conference table. It was barely 9 o'clock. Clara was holding the sealed form with a glove. 1968, said Marcus. What's her name? The form says baby girl Whitfield, said Evelyn. Date of birth, March 14th, 1961. Her mother is Dorothy Mae Whitfield, Harold Whitfield's aunt. What happened to Dorothy? At the end of 1967, she was brought before a custody court on the grounds that she could not maintain family unity. The child was placed in the state welfare system under a voluntary surrender record. Dorothy died 2 years later. Voluntary surrender, said Marcus. How old was Dorothy when she signed those documents? 26. And who made her sign that? Evelyn placed a second document on the table. A legal advisory letter dated 1967, on Pierce and Harlan letterhead. The letter, addressed to Dorothy Mae Whitfield, stated that placing the child in state custody was in the best interests of both the child and the mother. At the bottom of the letter was Dorothy's handwritten signature. The signature looked shaky. The same firm, said Clara. The same firm, said Evelyn. Arthur didn't look at the letter. He already knew. Before noon, Evelyn accessed the Van Wert County court records. The 1968 custody case had been officially closed, but something was missing from the system: the adoption certificate. The child had been placed with a couple named Kenneth and Agnes Pruitt in Mansfield, but the court approval required for adoption had never been obtained. A child had entered the system, but had never officially become that family's child. No adoption, said Evelyn. So the biological line of inheritance remains legally open. Clara leaned over the table. Is she still alive? Her last name on the social services record is Ruth and Pruitt. Kenneth died in 2003 and Agnes in 2011. Ruthen's file was transferred to Cuyahoga County. Marcus was already on his feet. I'm calling Cuyahoga. The records clerk spoke cautiously over the phone. We can't share that kind of information over the phone. I understand, said Marcus. I'll send an official request form. But just tell me this. Does the system show that person as alive? There was a brief silence. She has an active address on file, but I can't say anything else. Marcus hung up the phone. Alive. Where? Asked Clara. I don't know yet. The official response will take a week. We don't have a week. I know. Marcus jotted down a few notes on a scrap of paper. Born in 1961. Ohio. Pruitt. Last known, Cuyahoga. Possible name change. 64 years old. He set down his pen. But he has an active address in Cuyahoga. That's a start. That afternoon, Evelyn pored over the title history of the Whitfield property, layer by layer. Beneath the 1994 natural gas contract was a 1989 deed of conveyance. Harold had inherited the property from his father. Beneath that was a 1961 intrafamily deed of conveyance. It was notarized and signed between Harold's father, Wesley Whitfield, and his aunt, Dorothy May Whitfield, who was 20 years old at the time. One clause in particular caught her attention. This property shall pass in equal shares to the grandchildren of Wesley Whitfield and Dorothy May Whitfield. Evelyn read the sentence 3 times. This clause has never been revoked, she said. Clara came over to her side. She looked at the screen. So Dorothy's child, Ruth, and could be a legal co-heir to this property? If her biological lineage can be proven and there's no official adoption certificate, then yes. Dorothy's 1961 share may have passed to Ruth, and including the natural gas revenues. Did Gary Whitfield know about this document? Evelyn paused for a moment. I don't know if he knew about it, but this document was buried in the deepest layers of the county archives. It was obscured by 3 separate property transfers stacked on top of one another. No one has read that clause since 1967. Is that a coincidence? It's not a documented crime. But Pierce and Harlan handled both Dorothy's custody case and the property transfer processes during those years. Marcus stepped closer to the table. He looked at the dates. In 1967, Dorothy's guardianship proceedings begin, and the child is taken away. In 1968, the guardianship is officially closed, but no adoption papers are issued. In 1989, Harold inherits the land from his father, Wesley. In 1994, the natural gas contract was signed. And that family agreement from 1961, the clause written for Dorothy and her grandchildren, remained quietly in place, never revoked. No one remembered that clause after Dorothy's child was taken into the system, said Clara. Or perhaps they didn't want to remember it, said Marcus. That afternoon, while Marcus was searching through the Van Wert County Court's petition records from the past 6 weeks, he found a document. It concerned the estate of Harold Whitfield. The petitioner, James Rourke, Gary Whitfield's attorney. The date was 6 days ago. The petition requested 3 things: the expedited settlement of Harold Whitfield's estate, the registration of the property in Gary Whitfield's name as sole heir, and the transfer to Gary Whitfield of all income and future payments arising from the 1994 natural gas rights lease agreement. The court hearing was scheduled for 12 days later. Marcus set the petition down on the table. Who sent us this envelope? Clara asked. And why did they feel the need to send it exactly 6 days ago? No one answered. Arthur was standing in the doorway. It was unclear how long he had been there. Someone steered us toward this case, he said, and made us think we had time. What happens if Rourke wins in court? Asked Clara. Ruth's claim will be closed. Gary Whitfield will take the land and the natural gas revenues all to himself. And that 1961 clause will remain buried. Does Ruthin know this? Asked Clara. I don't know, but we need to find out. The office stayed open late that night. Evelyn officially requested a notarized copy of the 1961 deed from the Van Wert archives. Marcus sent the request form to Cuyahoga County. Clara found Dorothy May Whitfield's death certificate. Dorothy had died on February 24, 1969, at the Van Wert County Public Hospital. She was 28 years old. The cause of death was pneumonia. Exactly 14 months after she had given up her daughter. The notified to next of kin field at the bottom of the document had been left blank. Clara walked into Arthur's office late that evening. Arthur was sitting at his desk, but wasn't looking at the file in front of him. Have you seen Pierce and Harlan before? Clara asked. You've read Evelyn's notes. Yes. The firm's name came up in the 2 previous cases, she said. In the Irene Malloy file. In Francis Devereux's custody forms. And now here. This isn't a coincidence. No. Clara stepped closer to the desk. Arthur, I'm asking you directly. Did you know this firm before? Arthur didn't answer for a long time. Once, he said, I saw the name Pierce and Harlan in a file. I didn't know what it was at the time. It was just a name. Which case? The case I closed before I set up this firm. You never told me about that case. No. You need to tell me now. Not yet. We need to find Ruthin first. It wouldn't be right to open that file without knowing what she has. That's not a decision you can make on your own. For now, Arthur said quietly, it isn't. Clara left the room. She didn't close the door. Around midnight, Evelyn noticed something else. While searching the Van Wert court records, she found 4 separate custody and property transfer cases dating from 1967 to 1971. The same law firm's name appeared in all of them. But this time there was something else. The signing partner was the same person in every file. G. Harlan. Who is G. Harlan? Asked Marcus. George Harlan, one of the firm's founding partners. Evelyn jotted it down in her notebook. He left the firm in 1971. The records don't show where he went. Doesn't appear in the records, or isn't it shown? There's a difference between the two. Marcus stood up. Did Dorothy have any relatives in Van Wert? He asked. If Ruth Ann's last name has changed, we won't be able to find her through the Pruitt name. We might need to follow Dorothy's lead. I'll look into it, said Evelyn. 10 minutes later, Evelyn found a name. The Van Wert County birth records listed an older brother of Dorothy May Whitfield, Thomas Ray Whitfield. He was born in 1934. He was the older brother of Harold's father, Wesley. He had passed away in 1991. But Thomas had owned a small farm, and the deed transfer records listed only one heir, his daughter, Patricia Lynn Whitfield, married named Patricia Noakes. Patricia Noakes, said Marcus. Where? Salina, Ohio. Mercer County. 64 years old. So she's Dorothy's niece. And probably the closest person among those who might remember Ruth Ann. Evelyn paused. If she remembers, that is. Marcus glanced at his watch. It was past midnight. I'm heading to Salina in the morning, he said. When Clara returned to the conference room, there was something on the table. A short note left by Evelyn. The Dorothy clause in the 1961 deed. Traces of the same wording appear in 3 other Whitfield documents. It's as if someone wanted to keep that clause active. Not just once. Clara picked up the note and stared at it for a long time. Someone had wanted that clause to remain. Over the years, even though it had remained hidden beneath layers of property transfers, the clause had never been deleted. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe it had been forgotten. Or maybe the person who did this wanted someone to find it one day. Was the person who sent that envelope the same one? Clara sat down next to Evelyn. Evelyn was still staring at the screen. What if, when we reach Ruth Ann, Clara said. She doesn't want to know about this. It's her choice, Evelyn said. That's her decision, not ours. What if Gary Whitfield's lawyer gets court approval within 12 days? Then Ruth Ann's legal recourse would be closed. Depending on the statute of limitations and the court's discretion, there might be a way to appeal, or there might not. Dorothy's daughter, said Clara. She might not even know her mother's name. Most of the time, they don't. And not knowing doesn't take away their rights. Marcus is going to see Salina this morning, said Clara. I'm going too. Evelyn looked at her. Her eyes had left the screen. Will Arthur let you? I won't ask, said Clara. Patricia Noakes is from Dorothy's family. If she remembers Ruth Ann, she'll be the one to talk to me. Arthur sat in his office after the lights in the office had gone out. In the bottom drawer of his desk was an old manila envelope. There was no date on it. Just 2 lines. Harmon County, 1987. Closed. Arthur didn't open the envelope. But he couldn't close the drawer either. The sealed letter from Pierce and Harlan was sitting on his desk. He had seen that seal back in 1987, during the case in Harmon County. At the time, he hadn't asked whose signature was beneath the seal. Now, years later, the same name had cropped up in 3 separate cases. And each time, there was a defenseless person at the center of it all, a mother torn from her child, a woman institutionalized, a girl erased from her inheritance. Arthur picked up the envelope from 1987 and placed it in the center of the desk, next to the letter from Pierce and Harlan. 2 documents, 2 different decades, but the same pattern. He hadn't asked back then. Now he was asking. He read the 2 lines on the envelope once more. Harmon County, 1987. Closed. Then he looked up and gazed at the Pierce and Harlan letter on the table. There was a sentence beneath the firm's name. Printed, formal, cold. This legal arrangement has been finalized in accordance with the interests of the parties we represent. Which parties? Arthur stood up, grabbed his jacket, and turned off the light. Marcus set out at 6 in the morning. Clara was waiting at the door. She had texted Arthur. I'm going to see Salina. We'll talk when I get back. She hadn't received a reply. As the car headed south from Chicago, it was still dark outside. Clara watched the Indiana border through the passenger side window. Fields. A flat horizon. Is Patricia Noakes expecting you? She asked. No, said Marcus. But we're going all the way to her door. What if she doesn't open the door? She will. Someone sent us this envelope, and it was sent by someone from the same family. Patricia Noakes is Dorothy's niece. She's the closest person who knows about this file. What if Patricia isn't the one who sent the envelope? Marcus didn't answer. Salina, Ohio. It was a small town in Mercer County. A lakeside location, a few shops, an old high school building made of limestone. Patricia Noakes's house was a single-story home with a yard. Autumn had passed in the yard. The straw-colored grass was covered with frost. Marcus knocked on the door. A voice came from inside. The door opened slightly. Patricia Noakes was a 64-year-old woman with broad shoulders and weary eyes. When she saw two strangers at the door, her hand went to the doorframe. "Who are you?" Marcus Reed from the Whitmore Legacy Bureau. "This is Clara Whitmore." Marcus showed his ID. "We're conducting an investigation into Harold Whitfield's estate. We're looking for Dorothy May Whitfield's family." Patricia's hand tensed. "Dorothy passed away 30 years ago." "We know," said Clara. "But this visit is about Dorothy. It's about what she left behind." Patricia stood at the door for a long time. Then she stepped back. "Come in," she said. By the time they sat down at the kitchen table, Patricia had already started making coffee. Her back was turned to them. Marcus took out his notebook. He didn't wait. "Miss Patricia, when Harold Whitfield passed away, the probate process began. But we discovered a deed dated 1961. It states that Dorothy May Whitfield had a legal share in this property and that this share passed to her grandchildren." Patricia brought the coffee. "Dorothy had a child," she said. "Everyone knew it, but no one ever talked about it. That child's name," said Clara, "was Ruth Ann. She grew up with the Pruitt family in Mansfield. Did you know her?" "I saw her once. In 1974, the Pruitts had brought her to Van Wert for a funeral. Thomas, my father, didn't say a word that day. When we got home that evening, my mother said, 'Don't ever see that child again.' I didn't ask why." "Why didn't you ask?" Clara said. Patricia looked at her. "Back then, there were some things you just didn't ask. You city folks wouldn't understand that. The Whitfield family was important in this town. There were men working in Wesley Whitfield's barns. To question his name out loud meant putting those men's jobs at risk. Who was Dorothy, anyway? Just a woman who'd gotten into trouble with the government. Who would have listened to her?" When Dorothy passed away in 1969, Clara said. "She was 28. I know. The notified next of kin field on her death certificate was left blank. That was Wesley's doing," Patricia said finally. "He didn't notify anyone. He didn't follow up on Dorothy's situation. And no one held Wesley accountable. I did. When my father passed away in 1991, I went to Wesley's funeral. I looked him in the face and said, 'Do you remember Dorothy?' He looked at me and said, 'Who are you?' I don't know if he'd really forgotten or if he was lying to my face. But I turned around that day and never spoke to that family again." Clara looked at her. "Did you send us that envelope?" Patricia didn't hesitate for a moment. "Yes." Then I had a letter. Dorothy's younger sister, Rose, had written to Patricia in 1971. In it, she described what it was like to leave her baby with the Pruitts. "Who is Rose?" Clara asked. "Dorothy's younger sister. She died of cancer in 1973, but that letter stayed with my father for years. I found it when my father passed away." "Does that letter mention Ruth Ann?" "No, but it says this. The state took the child, Pierce and Harlan handled the paperwork, and Wesley didn't say a word." Patricia paused. Wesley was Harold's father, Dorothy's older brother. Marcus took notes in the car. Clara was still talking to Patricia inside. Marcus immediately called Evelyn. Ruth and Pruitt got married in 1989 or 1990. She took a Polish last name. It might be Akron or the surrounding area. Stop searching under the name Pruitt. Check the marriage records. "There's an Ohio Vital Statistics database," said Evelyn. "But it requires access authorization. Can you give me half an hour?" 10 minutes. When Clara went back inside to thank Patricia, the woman was sitting at the kitchen table. There was an old envelope in front of her. "I didn't have to go looking for this," said Patricia. "It was always here. Sometimes in the mornings I take it out and look at it." She handed the envelope to Clara. "This is Rose's letter. Take a look, but don't take it with you." Clara took the envelope. The letter was 1 page long. The handwriting was small and cramped. Wesley didn't do anything. He trusted Pierce and Harlan. "I didn't trust them, but I had no say in the matter," it read. Clara read the letter carefully. There was something in the last line. When that baby grows up, he should demand what's rightfully his. But I don't know what will happen to him if he gets involved with this family. These people have always protected one another. Clara handed the envelope back. These people have always protected one another, she said. What do you think that sentence means? The Whitfield family or that office? Patricia asked. Rose might have meant both. Evelyn called 35 minutes later. Ohio marriage records. 1989, Summit County, Akron. Ruth and Pruitt and David Joseph Kellerman. Legal name change. Ruth and Kellerman. Where is she now? Marcus asked. Not Akron. They moved in 2008. Mahoning County, Youngstown, Ohio. Do you have an address? Ruth and Kellerman is listed in the Youngstown voter registry. I've added the entire Kellerman household to the file. The address seems consistent. Phone number. Landline. I'll send it to you. Marcus dialed the number. After 2 rings, someone picked up. Yes. It was a man's voice. Middle-aged. Is this David Kellerman? Who's calling? Marcus Reed, Whitmore Legacy Bureau. I'm calling from Ohio. May I speak with Ruth and Kellerman? There's a legal notice regarding Harold Whitfield's estate. What's this about? The Whitfield property. Van Wert County. Ruth and may have legal rights to it. It's time sensitive. Ruth and doesn't want to discuss this matter. Marcus paused. Excuse me. I heard what you said. We're aware of this matter. And Ruth and doesn't want to talk about it. Please. The call ended. Marcus looked at the phone. Clara came over to him. What did he say? Ruth and knows about this, Marcus said. And she doesn't want to talk about it. Clara got into the car and sat there for a moment. How does she know? I don't know. And why doesn't she want to talk about it? Marcus leaned back against the steering wheel. 2 possibilities. First, Rourke or Gary Whitfield reached out to her earlier and talked her out of it. Second, Ruth and is already aware of this right and has consciously backed down. Why would she back down? Marcus started the car. We need to find her. We need to talk to her face to face. Meanwhile, Evelyn had discovered something else. George Harlan, the founding partner of Pierce and Harlan, who left the firm in 1971. Evelyn tracked him down in the Ohio State Bar records. Harlan had left Van Wert in 1971 and moved to Indiana in 1974. He had retired from the practice of law in 1981, and he had passed away in Fort Wayne, Indiana, in 1989. But before he died, he had done one thing. In 1988, through a notary in Fort Wayne, he had entrusted a sealed document. The condition for its release: this document shall be opened when Ruth and Pruitt or her descendants request it. The document had not yet been opened. Harlan left something behind, Evelyn told Arthur. For Ruth and Arthur paused. When 1988, a year before he died. Does Ruthen know about the existence of that document? According to the Fort Wayne Notary Archives, a notice was sent in 1994. It's unknown whether it was delivered. Arthur stood up. Harlan felt remorse, and he settled it with a document. I don't know what's in that document, said Evelyn, but it might contain the 1961 deed, Ruth Ann's address, and perhaps Pierce and Harlan's role in that process. Or even more. After telling Evelyn this, Arthur went to his own room. He opened the envelope dated 1987 in the bottom drawer. Inside were 2 pieces of paper. The first was a summary of the probate case he had closed in Harmon County in 1987. Arthur had read it countless times. He knew that case involved the inheritance of a small farm, a dispute between 2 siblings. Arthur had been a young lawyer at the time and had achieved a flawless outcome procedurally. Legally, the right person had received the land. But years later, he would come to understand that the person who was legally entitled to the land was not the one who truly deserved it. That case had been the real reason behind the establishment of the Whitmore Legacy Bureau. He paused to pick up the second one. That piece of paper was different. It was older. It didn't bear the Pierce and Harlan letterhead, just a handwritten name and date. G. Harlan. March 1971. Arthur had taken that document out of the file in 1987 and kept it. At the time, he didn't know what it meant. It had looked like a document misplaced in the client's file. Now he knew. It wasn't misplaced. Someone had put it there. He held the paper up to the light on the desk. There were 2 lines in Harlan's handwriting. This arrangement was not made in the best interests of the Whitfield family. Records have been kept. Records. Harlan had been hiding something. And those records were connected to the escrow document left with a notary in 1988. Arthur called Evelyn. Contact the notary in Fort Wayne. We can't open Harlan's escrow document directly, but we can help Ruth and request it. To do that, Ruth and needs to trust us first. Arthur, Marcus just sent a message. Ruth and doesn't want to talk. Did her husband say that? Yes. Her husband. Arthur paused for a moment. Well, did Ruth and speak herself? No. Then we don't know yet, said Arthur. Marcus and Clara were 2 hours away from Youngstown. Marcus connected the phone to the car's speakerphone and called Evelyn again. We need to reach Harlan's notary in Fort Wayne, Clara said. Can we get that document released? The terms of the trust are very clear, Evelyn said. Only Ruth and or her grandchildren can request it. We can't apply as an office. What if we convince Ruth and she makes the request? Then it will be released. But if Ruth and doesn't want to talk, it might be different face to face, said Marcus. Or she might shut down even more, said Evelyn. Marcus didn't respond. They passed the Mahoning County sign. Clara said, Ruth knows about this. She may have received the notice Harlan sent in 1994. She might not have wanted to deal with an inheritance lawsuit at age 40. Or she was scared. Scared, said Marcus. But she's 64 now, and she's facing natural gas revenues from 80 years worth of land. There's a court proceeding that will wrap up in 12 days. And her husband, who turned us away at the door. Marcus slowed the car down. He stopped in front of a gas station. Clara, her husband, answered the phone. I didn't speak with Ruth and that makes a difference. What do you mean? I mean Ruth and might be trying to avoid this case. But we didn't hear her voice. Clara thought for a moment. If we go straight there and knock on her door. If her husband answers the door, we can't get in. But if Ruth answers herself, that's a different story. Let's go then. They arrived in Youngstown in the afternoon. Ruth and Kellerman's address was a 2-story house with a broken stone staircase on a quiet street in the eastern part of the city. There was an old maple tree in the yard. The leaves had fallen. Marcus parked the car 2 blocks away. Clara walked up to the door. She rang the doorbell. Footsteps came from inside. The door opened. The woman was in her 60s. She had gray hair and a weary face. When she saw Marcus, something changed in her expression. She leaned against the door. Are you from the Whitmore office? Yes, said Clara. I'm Clara Whitmore. I spoke with your husband on the phone. I know. The woman stepped back inside and closed the door behind her. David left this morning. I asked him to. I know about this. I received some information back in 1994. I went to a lawyer then. The lawyer said, it'll be hard to prove. It'll take years, and you're likely to lose. That lawyer was wrong, Clara said. Ruth looked at her. There's a trust deed Harlan left behind, said Clara. It's with a notary in Fort Wayne. Only you can open it. And there's a deed dated 1961. It transfers Dorothy's share to you. The adoption was never finalized. The biological line of inheritance is open. Ruth was silent for a moment. I've kept this door closed for 30 years, she said. We know, said Clara. But your court date is in 12 days. Gary Whitfield's lawyer wants to register the property in his name as the sole heir, along with the natural gas revenues. Ruth leaned against the wall of the house. Was Dorothy really my mother? The birth certificate says so. And Patricia Noakes showed us Rose's letter this morning. It confirms it. Ruth closed her eyes. She didn't say anything. Then she opened the door. Come in, she said. Marcus was standing in the back. He looked at Clara. Clara walked in without looking at him. Inside was a small living room. An old photograph hung on the wall, a young woman standing against the sun on farmland. Ruth knew where she was even before she saw the photograph. But Marcus saw the photograph on the wall, and he realized the resemblance between the woman's face in the photograph and Ruth's face. It was Dorothy's photograph. Ruth had kept it there for years. Ruth sat down on a chair in the living room. Clara took a seat across from her. Marcus remained standing by the door. The photograph of Dorothy on the wall hung between them. It showed a young woman looking into the sun on a farm. The photograph was small, set in an old frame, and slightly warped. Who did you get this photo from? Clara asked. From the Pruitts, Ruth said. I found it while sorting through the house's belongings after Agnes passed away. There was nothing written on it. No name, no date. But I recognized it from her gaze. She looks just like me. Clara said nothing. Did the Pruitts ever mention it? Marcus asked. Kenneth never spoke about it. Agnes said once, when I was a senior in high school, your mother was a sick woman. She couldn't have protected you. That was it. I didn't ask any more questions, because I didn't want to know what lay behind the word sick back then. Now you know, said Clara. Ruth and looked up at the photo. She stood there like that for a moment. What Patricia said. Dorothy didn't want to sign it, did she? According to Harlan's letter, yes. She was pressured into signing it. Ruth and clasped her hands on her lap. I received that notice in 1994. It was an envelope from a notary. Inside was a short letter. There is a trust document left to you by George Harlan. It will be opened upon your request. I went to a lawyer. The lawyer said, proving biological lineage takes a long time. Challenging adoption records takes even longer. You could lose the case. What didn't that lawyer know? Asked Marcus. That the official adoption certificate was never issued. I didn't know that either. Now you know, said Clara. And there are 11 days left until the court date. Is this about the money? He asked. The natural gas revenues? It's to claim your mother's share, said Clara. The money is part of it, but only a part. Ruth stood up. Do you need to go to Fort Wayne? To unseal that document. It'll be unsealed when you request it. Your signature is all it takes. Then the notary can give us the document. We can go tomorrow, said Ruthin. Fort Wayne was 4.5 hours from Youngstown. Marcus started the car early in the morning. Ruthin sat in the back seat. Clara was next to her. No one spoke much along the way. As they crossed Ohio's western border, Ruth and looked out the window. Was Van Wert like this? Clara asked. I don't know, said Ruth, and I've never been there. The Pruitts were in Mansfield, not Salina. They took me to Van Wert once, for that funeral. But I was so little, I don't remember. If the land title is finalized, Marcus said, would you like to go? Ruth thought for a moment. Maybe. I don't know yet. That land isn't about going somewhere for me. It's enough that it's there to bear my mother's name. That's all. Evelyn was coordinating from Chicago. She had notified the Fort Wayne Notary Archives in advance. They had confirmed that the document had been officially preserved since 1988. The escrow record was still active. According to Harlan's instructions, the document would be released once the claimant's identity was verified. Arthur, meanwhile, called the Van Wert County Court that morning. He had prepared a motion to intervene against Rourke's petition for expedited probate. The documents weren't quite ready yet, but he informed the court that there was a third party in the line of succession who might raise an objection, and that this party's legal rights were being investigated. The judge granted a 10-day stay. Evelyn texted Marcus. 10 days. That's enough. The Fort Wayne Notary Archive was located in the city center, on the lower level of an old bank building. The ceilings were high. Fluorescent lights. Old wooden partitions. There was no one in the hallway. The archive clerk checked Ruth and's ID. She looked at her birth certificate. She took her signature. Then she went inside and brought out a file. The file was a beige cardboard envelope. On it, in Harlan's handwriting, was written, Ruth and Pruitt, to be opened upon request. Below that was the date, October 14th, 1988. Ruth and looked at the envelope. Clara turned to the clerk. Can we open it? The authorization form has been signed. You may open it. Ruth took the envelope. She placed it on the table. She waited a moment. Then she opened it. 2 documents fell out. The first was a 5-page handwritten letter. It had no heading, but the first line was clear. This letter is written by George Lewis Harlan. I worked as a partner at the Pierce and Harlan law firm in Van Wert, Ohio, for about 10 years. I left the firm in 1971. It took me 20 years to write this letter. The second was a notarized copy of the 1961 Whitfield deed. It included Dorothy's share and the clause regarding its transfer to her grandchildren. It was signed by Harlan, and next to it was a single line. This clause was intentionally concealed. Witness, G. Harlan. Clara left the letter with Ruth Ann. She didn't read it herself. Neither did Marcus. It took Ruth a long time to read the letter. In his letter, Harlan had written the following. Pierce and Harlan had handled Dorothy's custody proceedings, but it was Wesley Whitfield who had given the instructions. Wesley had requested that the child be taken away on the grounds of Dorothy's inappropriate behavior. The real reason was different. Dorothy had become aware of that clause in the 1961 deed, and she had refused to have it removed. Harlan himself knew that she had not voluntarily surrendered her child, but had been coerced into signing. But he had made her sign it back then. On the last page of the letter, Harlan had written, I should have written this document in 1971. I didn't. I should have written it in 1978. I didn't. I know it's too late now. But maybe it won't be too late for someone else. Ruth enclosed the last page. She didn't get up. She didn't say anything. She stared at the table in front of her for a long time. The sounds of the street drifted in from outside. Marcus turned toward the window and looked out. Clara leaned forward. Ruth and looked up. My mother protected this land for me, she said. Didn't she? She refused to remove that clause from the deed, Clara said. And she paid the price for it. Ruth and didn't say anything. She kept her eyes on the letter. So why did Harlan leave this to me? Because it was the only thing he could do, Clara said. It's too late. But he did it. Ruth and took the second document, a copy of the deed, and held it. She read Harlan's final line once more. This clause was intentionally concealed. Then she carefully folded the document and clasped it in her palm. What do I need to do? She asked. Marcus turned to face her. You'll fill out a motion to intervene in the case. We've prepared it. You can sign it right here. We'll submit Harlan's document as evidence. What will Gary Whitfield do? His lawyer will object. But the 1961 deed is in the official records. There's no adoption certificate. We have Harlan's testimony. It's a strong case. What if we lose? Marcus looked at her. Then at least you'll have fought. 30 years ago, you were told, you'll lose, and the door was shut. This time we're here. Ruth and picked up the pen on the table. My mother, she said, refused to remove that clause. Face to face, right in front of that office. She was 26. Yes, said Clara. Then I refused too. Ruth and signed it. On the way back to Chicago, Arthur called. Marcus put him on speakerphone. What does the document say? Arthur asked. Marcus explained. Harlan's letter, Wesley's instructions, and Dorothy's refusal to remove the deed clause. Arthur was silent on the phone. It was a long silence. We can submit Harlan's letter as evidence in court, he said. It's testimony documenting Wesley Whitfield's instructions. Wesley has passed away, but Gary Whitfield will have to defend the legitimacy of this process. And we have a notarized copy of the 1961 deed. What about Rourke's petition? Asked Marcus. There was already a 10-day postponement. During those 10 days, we'll file a formal objection and a motion to intervene on Ruth Ann's behalf with Van Wert. Harlan's document will form the backbone of that motion. Marcus looked ahead. Ruth Ann wasn't in the car. She'd said she'd be returning in a separate vehicle. She wanted to go to Youngstown. He had things to tell David. Ruth Ann signed it, said Marcus. We prepared the motion to intervene in Fort Wayne. Good. Arthur, said Clara. I'm listening. I know now why you started this firm. The Harmon County case. 1987. Did something similar happen in that case too? There was silence in the car. Yes, said Arthur. Was there someone disinherited in that case too? The legal procedure was correct, said Arthur. I didn't want to see what was behind the documents. I closed the file. Years later, I realized what I'd done. Was Pierce and Harlan involved in that case? There was a single note in Harlan's handwriting in that file. I couldn't make sense of that note back then. I understand it now. Will you show me that file? When you get back, said Arthur. Yes. The petition was filed with the Van Wert County Court within 9 days. There were 5 attached documents: Ruth Ann's birth certificate, the 1961 deed, and its notarized copy, the negative search result from Joe Davies County confirming the absence of an official adoption record, Harlan's letter of trust and its copy, and a written summary of Patricia Noakes's oral testimony. Rourke objected during the hearing. He argued that Harlan's letter was a one-sided statement. He contended that the provision in the 1961 deed had effectively been rendered void by subsequent transfers. However, the judge noted that the provision had never been formally revoked in writing and acknowledged that the biological line of inheritance remained legally intact. Rourke's motion for expedited disposition was denied. Ruth Ann Kellerman was admitted as an official intervener in the case. The land registration process was suspended. Gary Whitfield quietly left the courtroom. Rourke made no statement. Evelyn had identified 5 additional cases linked to Pierce and Harlan that same week. All were filed between 1963 and 1972 in Ohio and Indiana. They all followed a similar pattern: a vulnerable family member, a disputed custody or property transfer, and the firm's signature. In each, the same handwriting as in Dorothy's case appeared somewhere in the record: G. Harlan. None of these 5 files had been opened. Evelyn handed her notes to Arthur. As she set the folder on the desk, she said something. This office wasn't working at random. Same geography, same time period, same pattern. And every time, there was a party with property interests. Arthur counted the files. 5. We'll look at all of them, he said. Which one do we start with? Arthur placed the Harmon County 1987 envelope on the desk. It looked small next to the 5 new files. This will be the last one, he said. The others first. For the people who are entitled to them. Evelyn stood up. She turned around before reaching the door. Arthur, in some of these cases, the rightful owners might be elderly by now. Some of them may even have passed away. I know. Then why are we starting with these? Because some of them are still here, he said. And we won't know unless we look. As Marcus was leaving the office that evening, he saw the 5 files sitting on Evelyn's desk. He glanced at them. Unlabeled, just tabs with dates and county names. Ohio, Indiana. He noticed the small note on top of the files. In Evelyn's handwriting, a single line, G. Harlan's signature, present in all 5. Marcus read the note. He counted the files. 5. He turned and went to his own office. Before sitting down at his desk, he wrote down what had crossed his mind. A single line, on a piece of paper, which he then put in his pocket. If an office works this systematically, there's only one person who knows this office. Ruth and Kellerman sent Evelyn a message 2 days after the Van Wert County Court ruling. It was a short message. Can you help me find Dorothy's grave? Evelyn found the grave record in 5 minutes. Van Wert County Municipal Cemetery, Section 7, Row 14. The headstone bore only a name and dates. Dorothy May Whitfield, 1941 to 1969. Evelyn sent the record to Ruth and she added a short note at the bottom. If the court proceedings are finalized, a separate claim can be filed for the restoration of the headstone. We can help with that as well. Ruth and didn't reply that day, but 3 days later, she sent a single photo. It had been taken in front of the headstone. Ruth and wasn't in the photo. Someone had placed maple leaves in front of the headstone. Yellow and orange, fresh. They must have fallen that day. Evelyn saved the photo. Then she closed the file. Ruth and had found out where Dorothy's grave was. She hadn't called anyone to go with her, nor had she notified the office. She had simply gone. And on her way back, she had left leaves in front of the headstone. Evelyn considered that enough. She saved the file and put it on the shelf. As Clara was leaving the office, Arthur was standing at the door. He had his coat on and was about to leave. The Harmon County file is on the desk, he said. Clara set down the bag she was holding. Do you want me to read it? Yes. Now. Not now. Tonight. We'll talk tomorrow morning. Clara looked at him. Arthur didn't look away. He wasn't running away. He was just still pulling himself together. Tomorrow you'll tell me everything, Clara said. What you did in Harmon County, and why you hid this file when you set up the office. Everything, Arthur said. All right. Arthur walked past her. He went down the stairs. His footsteps echoed in the office's stone hallway, and Clara turned back into the office. The light was still on. One of the fluorescent tubes flickered slightly. A beige envelope lay on the small desk. On it were 2 lines, Harmon County, 1987. She closed it. Clara set her bag on the chair. She sat down. She picked up the envelope. It was cold outside in Chicago. Through the office window, she could see the lights of the courthouse. Someone was still working inside. Clara opened the envelope.